What happens when one of music's most genuine voices sits down for a simple morning interview and walks straight into an ambush? In just 44 seconds, George Stephanopoulos went from respected anchor to national embarrassmental because he couldn't handle the authenticity sitting right across from him. This is how Teddy Swims got kicked off Good Morning America, and how the internet instantly decided who the real villain was. The studio lights were blinding that morning as Teddy stepped onto the GMA set. He was there to promote his new album, talk about his tour, and celebrate his climb from viral covers to sold-out arenas. The crowd loved him. Teddy was the people's artist, raw, real, and impossible not to root for. He wore his usual relaxed look, tattoos on display, warm smile ready, bringing the same sincerity he brings everywhere he goes. Across from him sat George Stephanopoulos, notes in hand, with Robin Roberts and Michael Strahan seated on either side. The segment began normally enough. Teddy Swims. "Welcome to Good Morning America," George said with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for having me, man. Excited to be here," Teddy replied, his easy Georgia charm filling the room. "So let's talk about your rise," George said, leaning back. "You started doing covers on the internet, right? Singing in your car, your bedroom? When did you decide to actually become a real artist?" The question hit like a slap. Robin blinked. Michael shifted in his seat. Teddy's smile flickered, then steadied. "Well, George, I've always been a real artist," Teddy said calmly. "Those covers were me sharing my love for music. Every one of them came from my heart. Singing songs that already exist doesn't make me less authentic." George waved a hand dismissively. Sure, but you know what I mean? Covers are training wheels. Anyone can sing someone else's song. Creating your own work is when you become legitimate." Robin jumped in fast. "Teddy, you're original. Music has connected with millions. The vulnerability in your lyrics is beautiful." "Thank you, Robin," Teddy said gratefully. "I write from my life. Every song is real." But George wasn't done. He shuffled his notes and smirked. "Let's talk about your appearance. The tattoos, the casual clothes, the vibe. Do you worry you're limiting your audience? Mainstream America may not take you seriously." Silence. A producer whispered urgently into their headset. Michael's jaw tightened. Teddy inhaled slowly. "George, with all due respect, this is who I am. I'm not pretending to be anything else. My tattoos tell my story. People who listen to my music appreciate that I'm genuine. I'm not wearing a costume." In entertainment, George pushed, his tone sharpening. Image is everything. Great artists understood presentation. "Don't you think you'd be more successful if you cleaned up?" Robin cut in again. "George, what makes Teddy special is exactly that. He's authentic." George raised his hands. "I'm just asking what the viewers are thinking." "Are they, though?" Michael finally said, voice cool but loaded. "'Cause from what I've seen, people love Teddy exactly as he is." George didn't respond. He just pressed harder. "You worked regular jobs before music took off, right? Fast food, retail. A more humble background. Do you ever feel out of place now? Around artists with formal training, people raised in the industry. Does imposter syndrome ever creep in?" Teddy's expression changed. The warmth faded. Something sharper, colder, more guarded took its place. And that's where everything began to unravel. "I've never felt like an imposter." "George," Teddy said, calm but firm. "My path was different, yeah, but it was real. I earned everything I have through work and dedication. I didn't need connections or a fancy school to teach me how to feel music." Defensive, George chuckled, glancing at the camera. "Touched a nerve, I guess." "You're being disrespectful," Teddy replied flatly. A low murmur rippled through the audience. George leaned forward, voice sharpening. "Disrespectful. I'm conducting an interview. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you're not ready for this level of exposure." "Tough questions." Teddy's voice rose just slightly. "You've done nothing but insult me since I sat down. You questioned my legitimacy as an artist. You mocked my appearance. And now you're trying to make me feel small because of where I come from. That's not journalism, George. That's just being a bully with a fancy desk." The audience erupted. Robin nodded. Michael wore a knowing smile. George's expression hardened. "Let's remember who's the guest here. And who's the host. I've been in this business for decades. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, the most influential people on the planet. You're here because we're giving you a platform. And there it is," Teddy said, leaning back. "That's what this is about. You think you're better than me. Because you've been on TV forever, you think you get to look down on people. But listen, George's training wheel covers you dismissed. They reached millions. Those regular jobs you mocked? They grounded me. They taught me more about real life than you've probably ever seen from inside your bubble." George's face went red. "How dare you? Do you know who you're talking to?" "I'm talking to someone who forgot how to be humble," Teddy said softly but intensely. "You sit there in your designer suit acting untouchable. But you're not. You're just a man with a microphone who got way too comfortable being mean." Robin tried to intervene. "Let's all take a breath." "No, Robin," George snapped, cutting her off. His eyes never left Teddy. "This person walks onto our show, our prestigious showin, thinks he can lecture me about humility. Someone who got famous singing karaoke on the internet thinks he can tell me how to do my job." "Karaoke," Teddy repeated, slowly. Something in him shifted. "You know what, George? I came here with nothing but respect. I was excited. I grew up watching Good Morning America. But you made it clear if you don't fit into your neat little box of what's acceptable, you don't deserve respect." Michael stepped in, voice steady. "Teddy, for what it's worth, a lot of us here respect your talent and your message." "Thank you, Michael, truly." Teddy nodded at him, then turned back to George. "But your boy here has other plans." "My boy," George sputtered. "The disrespect is unbelievable. You want to talk about disrespect?" Teddy stood up. Mike still clipped on. "You invited me under the pretense of a promotional interview. Instead, you've spent the entire segment trying to tear me down. And for what? Because I don't look like your version of a star. Because I didn't come from privilege. Because I represent something real, and real scares you?" The cameras kept rolling. The room held its breath. Backstage, the producers were in full panic mode. No one knew whether to cut to commercial or let the chaos play out. It was live TV gold, but a complete nightmare for the network. George stood abruptly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're done here. This interview is over." "I agree," Teddy fired back without hesitation. "Because I'm not going to sit here and let you treat me like I'm beneath you." "Security," George barked, actually calling for backup. The audience gasped. You could feel the shock ripple through the studio. Robin stood up immediately. "George, come on, that's not necessary." "He's being hostile," George shot back, pointing at Teddy like he was a threat. "He's defending himself," Michael countered, rising to his feet too. "Against your attacks?" "Attacks." George's voice cracked into a higher pitch. "I asked legitimate questions." "No," Robin said firmly, her professional calm giving way to visible frustration. "You asked insulting questions, designed to belittle him. We all heard it, George. The entire country heard it. Teddy unclipped his microphone, shaking his head. "I'll see myself out. I don't need security to escort someone you already decided wasn't good enough to sit here." "That's right. Leave," George sneered. "Run back to your little internet fans who can't tell the difference between real talent and viral luck." Teddy stopped mid-step. He turned back slowly. "You know what the saddest part is, George? You used to be someone I respected. I watched you interview people with intelligence, with grace. But somewhere along the line, you forgot that the people sitting across from you are human beings with feelings, with dignity. Instead, you turned into someone who uses his position to make others feel small. That's not power, that's weakness." The studio fell silent. Not a breath. Not a whisper. Robin's eyes were glassy. Michael shook his head in disbelief. The audience didn't move. Every person was frozen in the moment. George opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in his career, the polished, unshakable newsman had no comeback. No rehearsed line, nothing. "I hope you find your way back to who you used to be," Teddy said softly, the anger gone, replaced by something much heavier: disappointment. "Because this version of you, it's not somebody to be proud of." With that, Teddy turned and walked off the set. The cameras followed him as he moved through the studio, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. As Teddy walked off the set, crew members reached out, patting him on the back, offering quiet nods of support. Audience members gave him soft, encouraging smiles. He didn't storm out. He didn't yell or slam anything, or fuel the drama. He simply walked away with his head held high, his dignity untouched. Back at the anchor desk, chaos erupted. George was arguing heatedly with the producers through his earpiece. Robin looked shaken, leaning toward Michael, whispering urgently. The control room made a snap decision. They cut to a commercial break 3 full minutes early. When the show returned, George's face was composed again, his polished TV mask firmly back in place. But something had changed behind his eyes. Something tight, strained, exposed. Robin took over immediately. "We're going to take things in a different direction this morning," she said, with practiced calm. "And we want to thank Teddy Swims for stopping by." "Yes," George added stiffly. "Indeed." His tone made it painfully obvious someone had spoken to him during the break. They tried to move on. But the damage was already done. In those few minutes of live television, something had cracked open. A respected artist had been dismissed, had stood his ground, and had been punished for daring to defend his own worth. And America had watched. Every moment. The remaining segments felt lifeless. George's interviews were suddenly careful, almost timid. Robin and Michael exchanged subtle looks that said more than words ever could. The energy in the studio never recovered. What should have been a routine morning show interview had turned into a turning point, a moment that revealed something deeper. The widening gap between old-school media gatekeepers and a new wave of artists who built their success outside the traditional system. The belief some still hold that success only matters if it follows the right path, looks the right way, comes from the right background. Teddy Swims arrived as a guest ready to promote his music. He walked out as something much bigger, a symbol of authenticity in an industry that too often rewards the opposite. Someone who would not let a powerful figure shrink him on national television. And George Stephanopoulos, seasoned, celebrated, polished, revealed something too. That despite decades of experience, prestige, and influence, he still viewed the world through a lens of elitism and judgment. That somewhere along the line, he had forgotten the simplest principle of all. Treat people with respect, no matter where they come from. The contrast could not have been clearer. On one side, a tattooed singer from Georgia, a man who worked regular jobs, who built his career video by video, song by song. never pretending to be anything but himself. On the other, a network anchor in an expensive suit using his platform like a weapon. Unable to see value in anyone who didn't fit his narrow vision of worthiness. The studio audience saw it. The crew saw it. Robin and Michael saw it. And most importantly, millions of viewers at home saw it. They saw who handled pressure with grace, and who crumbled under the weight of their own ego. When Teddy stepped out of the studio doors into the New York morning, he took a long breath. The noise of the city filled the air stark. Refreshing contrast to the tension he'd just left behind. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages poured in: fellow artists, industry friends, fans. Strangers who had watched the whole thing unfold live. All of them saying the same thing. You handled that perfectly. You stood your ground. You didn't let him break you. Inside the studio, during yet another emergency commercial break, George sat rigidly at the anchor desk, staring down at his notes as if they might save him. Robin approached with caution. That got out of hand, she said softly. He was disrespectful. George muttered without looking up. George. Robin replied, her voice gentle but unmistakably firm. You went after him from the very first question. We all heard it. He was defending himself. I was doing my job, George insisted. But the conviction was fading from his voice. Your job is to interview people, Michael added, stepping in, not tear them apart. That man came in excited to share his music, and you treated him like he had no right to be here. George finally lifted his eyes. For a split second, something flickered there, maybe regret, maybe realization. But just as quickly it was buried beneath his usual defensiveness. You're both overreacting, he said, stiffly. This will blow over by tomorrow. But Robin and Michael exchanged a silent look. They knew better. This wouldn't blow over. This was the kind of moment careers remembered. The kind that revealed who you really were. The show dragged on for the remaining hour. But everyone could feel it. The only thing anyone would remember was the explosion with Teddy Swims. Every segment afterward felt like filler. Something, too, filled dead air until everyone could leave and process the fallout. In the control room, producers scrambled. Phone lines lit up non-stop. Social media was in full eruption. The clip was spreading across every platform, and the verdict was unmistakable. Teddy had already won the court of public opinion before he even reached the parking lot. What George intended as a display of authority, an interview where he could flex, push buttons, maybe get a viral moment, had spectacularly backfired. Instead of looking like a tough journalist asking sharp questions, he looked like an out-of-touch elitist punching down at someone who didn't fit his mold. And instead of Teddy looking defensive or overwhelmed, he looked principled, strong. Grounded. The exchange wasn't just a men clashing, it symbolized something much bigger. A cultural tension simmering across industries. Who gets to define success? Do old gatekeepers still matter? Is authenticity more powerful than polish? Teddy represented authenticity without even trying. He answered honestly, stood up for himself when pushed, and refused to shrink for someone else's comfort. He didn't walk in looking for a fight. He walked in ready to talk about his music, his gratitude, his journey. But when he was told implicitly and explicitly that he wasn't good enough, he didn't lash out. He told the truth. George represented the other side, maybe without realizing it. The establishment, the old rules. The belief that success only counts if it follows a certain script. That tattoos, casual clothes, and working-class roots are liabilities instead of lived experience. That authenticity only matters if it fits traditional tastes. And in that live, unscripted moment, one side resonated with millions, and the other alienated them. The verdict wasn't close. Teddy stood for something real. George stood for something. Outdated as the show finally wrapped and the studio crew began breaking down the set. A heavy silence settled over everything. People spoke in hushed tones. Some avoided George entirely. Others gave him looks that ranged from quiet disappointment to open frustration. The morning had changed something, and they all felt it. This wasn't just another day at the office. This was a moment that would be replayed, dissected, and remembered. For years, George gathered his notes with stiff, jerky movements and left the studio without his usual handshakes, smiles, or small talk. No jokes with the crew. No friendly nods. Just a man walking away from the scene he created. Robin and Michael stayed behind, speaking quietly with producers, their expressions tense. They were already preparing for the inevitable storm of questions, fallout, headlines, and scrutiny. Outside the ABC building, Teddy stood on the sidewalk as his team circled around him. His manager approached, worry in his voice. That was intense. "Are you okay?" Teddy nodded, and then, despite everything, he smiled. Not triumphantly, not bitterly, just honestly. "Yeah, I'm good," he said. I couldn't let him talk to me like that. I couldn't sit there and pretend it was okay." "You handled it perfectly," his publicist said, scanning her phone, which was buzzing nonstop. "The response is unbelievable. Everyone is on your side." "I wasn't trying to win anything," Teddy replied quietly. "I just wanted respect. Basic human respect." And that was the heart of it. The entire confrontation hadn't been about publicity, clickbait, or strategy. It was about dignity, one man asking to be treated like he mattered, and another man showing he believed that dignity should only be given to people who fit a certain mold. The morning sun rose higher over Manhattan. New York roared on with its usual chaos, completely indifferent to the firestorm brewing online. But across the country, the conversation was only just beginning. Clips were going viral. Comment sections were erupting. Think pieces were already being drafted. Offices, group chats, and news forums buzzed with the same debate. Good Morning America had delivered a moment people wouldn't forget, just not the moment the network intended. It had become a vivid demonstration of what happens when authenticity collides with elitism, when old media slams into new media, when someone refuses to shrink. Teddy Swims entered that studio as a successful artist. He walked out as something mar a voice for anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. For anyone judged because they looked different, came from the wrong place, or didn't follow the approved path. For anyone ever dismissed by someone in power who mistook their authority for superiority. And George Stephanopoulos. He began the day as a respected newsman. He ended it as a symbol of everything people are exhausted by in media and celebrity. Culture, the condescension, the gatekeeping, the rigid definitions of worthiness. Neither man intended for any of this to happen. But in those raw, unfiltered 44 seconds, those moments where politeness shattered and truth surfaced, they revealed exactly who they were.